All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the weekly webinar. Glad to have you here today. We missed you last week on Thanksgiving, and hope everybody had a good holiday sharing with your family and friends. We are excited to have released Why on our YouTube channel, and we know lots and lots of you have tuned into that, and lots of you have let us know that it's been meaningful to you. So we are very happy about that. Continue watching. Please feel free to share the link far and wide to anybody you think might have some kind of interest or connection to it. We want everyone to feel well supported by the information that's in Why, and of course by the KU ADRC. So with that said, I will introduce our speaker for the day. She is my colleague, Rosie Pasqualini, who is a LEAP program assistant. And what that means is that Rosie facilitates and improves LEAP programming that talks about healthy lifestyle courses. Rosie is passionate about leveraging technology and research to improve health outcomes. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Cognitive Science and Philosophy from Beloit College in Wisconsin. So before I turn it over to you, Rosie, I'll remind everybody to keep yourselves on mute, please. We are recording, so this recording will be available on our website. And if you need the closed captioning feature, check that out at the bottom of your screen. If during our presentation you have questions or comments for Rosie or for me, feel free to use the chat and I'll watch that. And I'm sure Rosie will be happy to give you some information and answers beyond her presentation. So with that, thank you, Rosie, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's really good to see you all here, and I'm excited to talk about a topic that I find really interesting, which is the connection between the mind and the body and how we approach that, both sort of as individuals, just considering the concept in our own lives, but also in healthcare, and sort of the ramifications that this concept has for understanding the relationship between our mental health and our physical health. I wanted to say just before we get started, as Kelly mentioned, I help to facilitate the LEAP program, where we talk about strategies that you can use to help improve your brain health in several different lifestyle areas. It is open to anyone and it is completely free. So if you'd like to learn more about LEAP, you can check out the link that I put in the chat or email us directly, which I also put the email address in the chat. And I'll talk a little bit about the program just right at the end of the presentation. But let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to share my screen. Just a sec. Okay, let's do it. So, as I said, I'll be talking about how we approach the relationship between the mind and the brain and the body, and sort of the impact that this has on our brain health and our body health. And specifically, I am going to introduce you to two key body systems, the gut-brain axis and the HPA axis, which is one of our two main stress response systems that really exemplify this key connection between the brain and the body, and that importantly do have ramifications for brain health as well as for improving general health. So I think that during this presentation, you may learn some new ways sort of to understand how your mental or psychological health and responses affect your physical health and vice versa with these key systems. This presentation maybe a little bit more informative than practical, but I have included some sort of key actionable tips to make it a little more practical and relevant to your daily life. So let's go ahead and get started, and I hope you enjoy. I'm going to talk briefly about a slightly abstract question, which is the question of the separation or connection between the mind and the body, which in philosophy we call the mind-body problem. And I'm talking about this even though it's a bit abstract because it has direct ramifications for our health. So as you may be able to guess from the term, this is basically the question of how distinct the mind is from the body. This is a complicated issue to which, at least I believe, there's no one right answer, that is informed by our cultural backgrounds, our religious backgrounds, and other beliefs that we may have, as well as our personal experiences. A sort of key thing is that some, though not all people, kind of experience the mind and body as feeling like intuitively separate systems. So an example of this is that you may feel that your mind is kind of who you are and that your body is simply along for the ride. And even though there's no sort of one answer to this question, to whether or not this feeling of distinction is necessarily correct, this idea that the brain and the body are kind of disconnected, which may be an intuition that we sometimes have, does affect how different health conditions are viewed. So an example of this is that we may often make clear distinctions between mental health conditions and physical health conditions, and for good reason. This makes a lot of sense to us oftentimes. But this can, for example, cause us to downplay a little bit that mental health conditions can have physical elements or physical repercussions, or that physical health conditions can then go on to affect our mind, such as our emotions and how we respond to the situation and our general outlook on life. So an example of this is that we consider depression to be a mental health condition, but we also know that it's influenced by physical factors such as sleep and can present in certain physical ways, such as feeling not as motivated or able to be as active or move around as much as normal. Is an example of a manifestation of depression that is more physical. So you can probably imagine how neurological conditions, especially such as Alzheimer's disease, really kind of blur this distinction between the mind and the body, and that this is something that's important to keep in mind when we understand conditions like these. And also just in general, again, even though there is no one right answer to connect it, and that keeping this connection in mind can help to improve our health in a variety of ways. So while it would be neat for me to be able to explain and to understand all of the ways that the brain and body are connected, I'm going to focus on two key relationships today, or systems that I think really exemplify this connection. They're going to be the gut-brain axis, the way that our brain is directly connected to our gut and vice versa, and our HPA response, a specific type of stress response that strongly involves both more psychological elements and more physical or physiological elements. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the gut-brain axis. I think this is, for lack of a better word, really cool and interesting. This is a two-way relationship between your central nervous system, that is your brain and your spinal cord, and your gut, i.e. your digestive system. Something that is sort of interesting and important to note is that your gut actually has its own nervous system. So you know that your brain contains neurons. Those are what we generally refer to as brain cells. But your gut actually has some neurons in it as well that are able to communicate with your brain, although it's not in sort of the same exact way that your brain's neurons communicate with each other. And I'll speak a bit more about that on the next slide. But we know, for example, that there's a very strong relationship between our gut health and our emotions and emotional well-being. One example of this is that if you experience butterflies in your stomach when nervous, that is your gut sort of communicating to your brain, or your brain and gut communicating together related to this state of anxiety or potential threat that you're facing. So they're very closely linked. And related to that, our guts often react to and indirectly influence many feelings of fear and anxiety and excitement, especially. So I'm going to talk a little bit more just about, specifically what it means for your gut to have those neurons, because I think this is really interesting. You have a whole nervous system in your gut called the enteric nervous system, which contrasts with the central or primary nervous system that I mentioned. It's a mesh of neurons in your gut that their primary responsibility is to control gastrointestinal function, so your digestion. And in fact, your gut uses neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin just like your brain does. Now, this doesn't mean that your gut is using these in quite the same way that your brain would. Your gut does not, for lack of a better word, think like your brain does, even though it can transmit information. But it's still believed that the balance of neurotransmitters in your gut can affect your mental health and your brain health. And so this is important to keep in mind. In fact, 90% of the serotonin, a key neurotransmitter that is in your body, is produced in your gut originally. So a really key player in our enteric nervous system is our gut bacteria, which we have a strong influence over based on what we eat. You actually have 10 times more bacteria in your gut than you do cells in the rest of your entire body. And these bacteria play that really crucial role in balancing the production of your neurotransmitters, both in your gut, but then somewhat in your brain. That's still being studied. And there is a link between that neurotransmitter production in your gut and your mood and behavior. So for sort of to oversimplify it a little bit, if you're not eating particularly well, if you're not eating foods that make you feel good on a regular basis, this can directly influence our mood. In addition, bacteria play a really vital role in gut inflammation, which can go on to affect inflammation in the brain and the rest of the body due to that fairly close link between the brain and the body. And so these are kind of two examples of how what you eat due to that gut-brain connection can influence your brain health. So for instance, we know, though, this is a complicated topic with a lot of different factors, that inflammation in general over time can be harmful to our brain health. It appears to increase risk of Alzheimer's disease or potentially contribute to progression, but it also indirectly influences other factors such as high blood pressure, which may then influence our risk of conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. This is less of a strong connection, I believe, but our mood and our stress levels, as I will talk about, also have a connection to our risk of Alzheimer's disease or other neurological conditions. And we know that certain mental health conditions can increase our risk of having brain health neurological issues. So those are kind of two reasons why it can be helpful to try and modulate those gut bacteria. But I think it's really interesting just due to that super close connection between the gut and the brain. We talked a lot more about how to support your gut in our Mediterranean diet course, and you can find information about that in the link that I put in the chat. But I wanted to share some key ways that you can kind of start doing this if you're interested. Some research suggests, like this paper by Asnikar et al., 2021, that diet has a stronger effect on our gut microbiota than even our genetic background. So it doesn't matter necessarily so much what your genes are. What you eat directly determines the bacteria that live in your gut, and that directly influences your brain health. Some key overall things that I would say are good for almost everybody, or potentially everybody, are to eat a very wide variety of foods, especially a wide variety of vegetables. What this does is that it helps keep your gut bacteria really diverse. When there's sort of more of a monoculture of certain gut bacteria, this can, in some situations, lead to more inflammation. And vegetables especially have just a really wide variety of nutrients, and there may kind of be a wide variety of bacteria that are literally like consuming them in your stomach, encouraging a wider variety of bacteria to reproduce in your gut. Another thing is to work on limiting very highly processed foods, as well as refined sugars. So the deal with refined sugar especially is that while sugar is not inherently bad for us, the bacteria, there's a key bacteria that eats the sugar that we eat, that kind of thrives off of it, can cause inflammation. And so if you're eating a lot of food that is very rich in sugar, especially refined sugars, so, you know, all of the delicious stuff like chocolate and cakes, and I don't know, I'm in the mood for some frosted flakes right now, that can over time increase the level of inflammation in your body. Another really interesting thing that I didn't note here is that the foods that you eat the bacteria in your gut influence the foods that you crave. So for example, when you start reducing sugar, if that's something that you choose to do, it can feel very difficult because you will have cravings, and sugar is the taste that humans tend to prefer from birth. However, your craving for sugar is influenced by the fact that the bacteria in your gut that thrive off of sugar can literally signal to your brain for you to eat more sugar because they want to survive. So it's not only the fact that as humans we generally like a sweet taste, but the bacteria you have want to live, and they kind of, I don't want to call it exactly mind control, but they have some influence on what we crave. And so if you're ever frustrated because you feel like you really just will never stop craving very, very sweet things, of course, everything in moderation is what we recommend. But know that that craving may start to dissipate if you start reducing sugar. That's something that I like to keep in mind for myself as well. A couple of other tips just to help support that healthy gut bacteria are to chew your food slowly to improve digestion. We think of digestion as starting in the stomach, but really it starts in the mouth with the saliva reaching your food, which sounds, well, it's not gross. That's just how it is. So chewing food slowly can help us start to break down the food sort of before it even hits our stomach, obviously, and improve our absorption of nutrients, helping to create a more diverse population of gut bacteria. Another thing, and this is of course when it is safe and feasible to you, is actually to visit a variety of different places. While it's obviously true that we don't want to be exposed to harmful bacteria and viruses, which I understand, by visiting a variety of different places and essentially taking on different bacteria that are perhaps more neutral, those essentially can go live in your gut and also help improve your digestion. It sounds a bit silly or strange, but this is true. So making sure to visit a variety of different places when possible, even though it's not like essential to supporting a healthy gut, can help support this diversity of your gut bacteria. So that's what I have for you specifically about the gut-brain axis and how it's sort of both a mental and a physical phenomenon. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the brain-body connection in relationship to stress. So our stress response, and we generally define stress at LEAP, at least as our combined mental and physical response to very challenging situations. What counts as very challenging is, of course, you know, somewhat subjective. But the experience of stress strongly involves both our body and our brain. And I'm going to talk about one specific stress response, the HPA axis, that I think best exemplifies that connection between the brain and the body. The HPA axis is the set of key interactions between two parts of our brain as well as our kidneys that then comes to involve different parts of the body as well, that make up our longer term stress response. By longer term, it really is, our short term stress response is dealing with very immediate threats. So like there's an oncoming car in a direction you weren't expecting, you swerve out of the way. That's what our fight or flight response is generally for. But longer term issues, the things that we face in life, such as financial stress, work stress, relationship stress, dealing with illness, etc., are more mediated by this somewhat more complex relationship between these key parts of your body. Your hypothalamus in your brain, your pituitary gland also in your brain, and then finally your adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys. So it's both this psychological and more physiological response, as I'll discuss, but that's kind of exemplified just by the fact that it involves both the brain and the kidneys as key players. The goal of our stress response, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but I think, still accurate, is to maintain steady levels of cortisol, a specific hormone, as well as certain other key hormones to help you handle the stressor. And stress often kind of gets a bad rap, and I want to emphasize that our stress response itself, the experience of stress, while very uncomfortable, is not inherently a bad thing in moderate amounts. So cortisol plays a lot of key roles in our functioning, especially our immune system and especially our stress response. Some cool things that cortisol can do is that it helps to keep our brain and body on higher alert and to maintain a steady level of glucose, of sugar in our blood, to keep our energy up, hopefully, as we're dealing with an ongoing threat or issue. Importantly, it also helps to influence our emotional and psychological response to stressors. So stress is uncomfortable, at least I think for the majority of people, and cortisol is part of what can make us feel wired and on edge. But there's a sort of good aspect to that, at least in theory, which is those feelings motivate us to act, to try and help control the stressor and get out of danger or perceived danger. So you can see in this image here that the production of cortisol, those three key players that I circled are all producing more cortisol, is a feedback loop. When you produce cortisol, your brain and your body are then prompted to produce more. It's kind of thought that this is to help you maintain a consistent stress response, but it is one reason, one clear reason why our stress response can get a little bit out of control and why it can feel hard to calm down when you're dealing with a long-term stressor or after dealing with a long-term stressor. There's something very interesting about cortisol, which is that it is kind of double-edged in terms of inflammation. So cortisol in the short term is anti-inflammatory. It reduces the amount of inflammation in your body. And this is kind of its, I guess I want to say the role that it is designed for. That's what we kind of wanted to do in the short term. But in the longer term, it actually increases inflammation in our body. It has this paradoxical effect, which can then have negative consequences for our brain health. And here I have included a picture of cortisone 10 that I have used, you may have used. You may have heard, before about cortisol as being a stress hormone and perhaps increasing inflammation. So maybe you thought, like I once did, well, if it's so bad for inflammation, why does it relieve my itch? Why does it relieve my immediate immune system responses when I have an itch? And that's because when it begins its response, it is anti-inflammatory. But over time, if we keep perpetuating that stress response due to the situation that we're in, it increases our inflammation and it can have negative consequences for our brain health. That key link, again, between different types of inflammation and the risk to brain health is specifically why in LEAP, we talk about the importance or relative importance of mitigating stress to help protect your brain from damage. When we think about regulating our stress response, I really want to emphasize, as is of course kind of the point of this presentation, that it is a heavily mental and physical process. I think, for me, I am better at the physical aspects and worse at the mental aspects, such as reframing a problem in order to decrease the stress, but I'm better at, say, prioritizing my sleep in order to help relieve the stress. So most people are typically better sort of at one area of those than the other, addressing the mental part, the framing when appropriate and possible, versus addressing your physical health, which can also help to decrease stress. And I just wanted to say that both of these are very important, but they kind of make up for each other to an extent, which is why, it's important and interesting to work on both of these areas, whichever one feels most appropriate when dealing with a stressor. So that was a lot of words. So some examples of what I mean is that even when you're feeling really wired, even if it would not be appropriate for you to reframe the stressor or to, quote unquote, ignore it in that moment, exercise has been shown independently of those psychological factors to help decrease stress levels. In addition, sleep is essential. It's really essential for emotion regulation, which, to some extent, regardless of that problem, will help you deal with it better and potentially feel a bit more calm as you're dealing with your stressors. In addition, with that more mental or psychological side, finding ways to reframe or to lessen the stressor when applicable can be very helpful, of course. There are certain things, sort of more benign examples I could give, like giving a presentation. I feel anxious and I also feel a little bit excited. When I frame my presentation giving as something that is more exciting as opposed to more anxiety inducing, that can help reduce my stress a little bit while still maintaining that, focus and excitement that will help me give a presentation. So that's one example of reframing a stressor that's a shorter term stressor, I suppose, when applicable. You may have heard about relaxation techniques and perhaps feel a bit sick of them, because this is sometimes how I feel when another person tells me to meditate. But finding relaxation techniques that work for you really can be essential and helpful if you find ones that really that you feel like get you. And so the reason why this is helpful is because those relaxation techniques can help to start to break that feedback loop where you're producing more and more cortisol and stress hormones and having trouble calming down. So it's becoming a more maladaptive situation. And so we talk about different stress techniques in LEAP as well, but some key things, despite the fact that I just kind of roasted it, are meditation. This can have a very powerful effect for many people, and doing it for just a few minutes a day has been shown to help improve brain health more directly than certain other methods, as well as really helping us to relieve stress, even when it would not be appropriate or it is not possible to remove the stressor completely. Some other things that I would briefly recommend include progressive muscle relaxation. This is a method where what you do is you start at the top of your body. You tense, for example, your face or whatever sort of top body muscles you're identifying, squeeze them as hard as you can and then relax. And then you kind of go down your whole body and continue to do that tensing and relaxing. And this has been shown to really help activate our sympathetic nervous system, our more rest-based system, and again, help to break that sort of cortisol cycle. Another thing is to limit caffeine and alcohol when possible. I really like coffee, and this is something that I struggle with. But we know that while coffee has plenty of brain health positive effects, it actually can help reduce your risk of dementia in the long term. Drinking a whole lot of it, for example, is very stimulating and can indirectly, or I think directly actually, cause you to produce more cortisol. And if you're already dealing with a lot of stressors in your life, this can cause that stress response to become maybe less adaptive and maybe a little bit more harmful. Another thing, as many of you may know, is that caffeine can interfere with sleep, which is why we actually recommend not drinking caffeine 10 hours before you go to sleep. That may feel like a really long time for many people, but it has a 10-hour half-life. So for it to be sufficiently out of your system to sleep well, for some people, a sort of longer period of limiting caffeine can be necessary. Now, if it doesn't keep you up in that way, then that's totally fine. But if you're stressed out, if you have trouble sleeping, and you drink a lot of coffee, I would recommend decreasing caffeine if possible. Alcohol has sort of related effects. It can increase our inflammation levels directly, which then also can contribute to that feedback loop, contribute to the production of cortisol. And while alcohol in moderation is okay for brain health in general, a whole lot of it is not the best for our brains anyway. So those are some key tips about regulating your stress response with both more physical and more mental tips and processes. Okay, so today I talked about our HBA stress response and the fact that it's both very mental and physical, and some things you can do to calm down or sort of control that response in order to help protect your brain health. And I also discussed the gut-brain axis, which I think also really exemplifies that connection between our brains and our bodies. And thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in learning even more about brain health, we cover gut health and stress and talk a little bit about the brain-body connection in our different LEAP programs. So just for a quick overview, our main or longer program, Brain Health Bootcamp, is a multi-week program where each week for 1 hour, we meet and discuss a specific lifestyle factor and the things that you can do in that lifestyle area to help protect your brain health. Our next Brain Health Bootcamp is going to be starting on January 22nd. We'll meet at Mondays at 1 p.m. and you're welcome to go to that website to sign up. Also, it is free, if I didn't mention that. We're also currently offering our Mediterranean diet program. The current format for this program is that it is self-paced. So if you go to that website, you can sign up, and instead of it being, for example, a certain amount of Zoom sessions, what would happen is you gain access to a library of videos where each video covers a specific topic related to the Mediterranean diet and how to implement food changes recommended as part of that pattern of eating into your everyday life. The Mediterranean diet has been shown to help improve brain health for many people. And so if you're interested in nutrition and brain health, this may interest you. Last but not least, and thank you for listening to the spiel here, we have a couple of upcoming webinars that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this webinar. So our next webinar is actually next Tuesday on December 5th, and I will be talking about neuroplasticity, another topic that I really love, which is your brain's ability to rewire itself throughout your entire life. And I want to emphasize that, first of all, this neuroplasticity is very good for brain health because it helps your brain adapt to damage by forming new connections, and that you genuinely do maintain it at all stages of life, no matter where you are in your brain health journey. So we'll talk about ways to boost neuroplasticity, your brain's flexibility to protect brain health. Last but not least, we're going to be having a webinar on January 8th that is specifically about building good habits to protect your brain health. This will be less about which specific brain health habits to implement and more about how to build habits that stick in general. Because, while we all want to have healthy habits, we all have plenty of limitations, life gets in the way, and it can be really hard to stick to them, and I understand that. So we wanted to just share some science-based tips about how to build better habits in general. And since many of you may already have some experience building good habits, you're also welcome at that webinar if you attend to share your own tips. That is all I have for you today, but I will check out the questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Rosie, thank you so much. I hope you will check out the chat because you've got some comments and compliments. We have a question from.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So I don't quite understand visit different places. Do you mean eat in different restaurants, different ethnic foods? That is a great question, and that was definitely unclear. No, I literally mean going to different locations. The bacteria that you are, different microbial air spaces, that is a good way to put it. The bacteria that you're encountering in different locations, some of them, generally the ones that are not going to be harmful, will make their way into your gut. And this can be good for your gut diversity. Thank you so much for the comments. Thank you very much, Anne. I really appreciate it. Amy said, I missed what time on Tuesday the webinar is and through which program. So it will be, that is through LEAP, and it will be Tuesday at 1 p.m. Let me think for a quick second, sorry. If you go to that website that I put in the chat, you can sign up and you will receive a link to join the webinar when it's time. But yes, it is through LEAP. It's kind of like a LEAP exclusive webinar thing. Why can you get sourdough bread in San Francisco, but it's not as good here? I don't know. I love sourdough bread. I'm sorry to hear about the sourdough bread struggle. You're also inspiring me to have more bread, more sourdough bread. It's been a while. Oh, I see. It's the microbes in the air. Sorry, I get the joke now. That was funny. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And feel free to email if you have any questions or thoughts. Can you put the link in the chat again? Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you, everyone. Great presentation. I agree with everyone. Rosie, I will remind everyone that we will be back next Thursday, which will be December 7th. My goodness. And as Rosie talked about the brain-body connection, next week's topic is going to be about the brain-mouth connection. Our speaker is Valerie Blanco Johnson. And she is going to talk to us about the question of whether oral health matters to our brain's gray matter. So we'll pick up a little bit where Rosie left off on talking about how all of our systems coordinate. So we hope you'll join us for that. We will have some more information on our website and in the MyAlliance newsletter on Monday, so stay tuned for that. We look forward to seeing you. Have a great week. Enjoy the last day of November. Happy December. And thank you again, Rosie, for an excellent presentation. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.